Hello, my name is Lachey, and welcome to Unmasking True Crime Misdeeds, a show where my co host Marie and I explore tragic moments in true crime news to paint the scene in an informative light. We try to remember that these people were not characters in storybooks, they were real human beings, as well as victims of unforgivably heinous acts. Today's episode covers the heartbreaking fates of two Kansas women who went missing at the end of March 2024. There's quite a lot to unpack and a lot of important details to cover to fully understand the information available in this case. So let's get into it. Veronica Butler, age 27, lived in Hugoton, Kansas, and had two young children, age 6 and 8. Due to difficult circumstances in which Veronica couldn't maintain stable work or housing for some time, her ex, Wrangler Rickman, had primary custody of their children. Veronica had been attending supervised visitations every Saturday since 2022, but the custody battle with her ex had been going on since 2019. Both parents alleged that the children were not being treated properly and in others' custodies, which made the situation much more tense. Because Wrangler was later incarcerated for weapon possession, the children were actually staying with his mother, Tiffany Adams, age 54, at the time the incident recovering took place. He'd already been released from prison, but still had to attend a court-ordered rehab program. Veronica was doing her very best to receive more visitation. She'd filed for a petition to do so not long before the events of this case took place. A hearing was scheduled for mid-April. In the meantime, she headed out to attend one of her supervised visits on March 30th, along with Jilian Kelly, age 39, who was a court-appointed visitation supervisor. Veronica was planning to meet Tiffany at an abandoned gas station in Eva, Oklahoma, where she would pick up her children and take them to a birthday party that afternoon. So, as usual with cases where there's a broken family dynamic, right, you start to unpack the different people that are in the cases, right, because you really have to understand how they affect what eventually happens to these two women. And she wasn't actually with her partner anymore. They had broken up, but he also had his own legal troubles, so he wasn't actually able to be an active parent. And with her, she wasn't actually stable enough to provide for her child. So in a lot of situations when things like this happen, we look to the grandparents to step in and take care of the kids, which is what happened here. The paternal grandmother, she stepped up. And you would think in an environment that is healthy, this would be a great thing. The mom would still have access to her children, and the father, he can have rest and peace that his kids are looked after while he's dealing with his court and rehab issues, right? But in this particular case, it gets a little muddy. And when that happens, it actually really becomes very dangerous. And I'm sure there was a ton of vitriol between the two because it seemed as if the child was a pawn.
Yeah, it's, like you mentioned, there is a great aspect to this, keeping the children in their family. They're not going into the foster care system. And I think it adds that layer of emotion, though. The grandmother knows what her son is capable of. I'm sure she's got some preformed thoughts on her daughter-in-law or daughter. And they start to take over this whole, I need to protect. And like you said, the child is a pawn. It's a possession. She, at this moment, has possession of this child.
And it's not healthy. The thought process of possessing any individual is not healthy.
Right. And then as we go through the script a little more, we talk about court-appointed supervisors. And I think it's really important because I learned something in this case. My first initial reaction was that a court-appointed supervisor was someone that the courts appointed to be with you during your visitation. What I learned that is in some cases, yes, the courts do say, here's a professional that you're going to pay, and this professional will accompany you on all of your visits. In other courts, you as the family are allowed to pick 3 or 4 people, whether that's friends or family members that are trusted, to participate in these visitations with you. So in the case of Veronica, Jilian was a friend of hers, and she was on this list of 3 or 4 people who were approved for visitation. So she is not a professional. She is not someone with a ton of experience in, supervised visits. And I think that's important to keep in mind as we go through this case. Because like I said, I assumed that this person was a professional.
Right, because along the way, a professional probably would have been able to look at some of the behaviors and the conversations that were exhibited between the two and the actions, and maybe went back to the court and requested a variation in visiting time or even custody arrangement.
Yeah, I definitely think there would have been some red flags spotted.
When Veronica and her children missed the birthday party they were supposed to go to, family members tried to contact or locate her, and when she didn't pick up calls or reply to texts, her family went out looking for her. Instead, they found her vehicle abandoned on the side of the road only a few miles from the gas station she'd been heading to. Neither Veronica nor Jilian were in or around the car, so the family reported the 2 women missing. Investigators went to the scene where the car was found to collect evidence and hopefully get to the bottom of what was then a missing persons case. Again, this family is dynamite. When they knew that she wasn't at the party, they all hopped into a car and they were headed directly to where she said she was. So it's important to note here that she had a really good relationship with her family, which I think is really beautiful. It's very special. And maybe they even use different technology too, like Find My iPhone, and they could have been sharing locations. But either way, they did what they were supposed to do to get to her closely. And once they stumbled upon the car and they found what they found, they were then able to alert the authorities, who jumped in right away.
Yeah, and I think that's huge because we talk about a lot of times in the different cases that we've covered that it takes 24 hours to file a report. And I just think about if 24 hours had the opportunity to pass, I think the outcome may have been a little bit different. But they find this evidence in the car. There's signs of a struggle, and they contact authorities. And I think it's within 2 weeks, the authorities are able to find the bodies in this, buried in a freezer in a cow pasture.
Exactly. And it was said that it was 15 feet underground. And it was also said that the farm was connected to one of the suspects. Now, this is still an ongoing case, so we don't have those additional details. But I find it interesting that 4 suspects were arrested and she was found 15 feet underground in a freezer. So clearly there was a lot of work done to get her there, and it would make sense that a few of them helped out with that.
A lot of work and a lot of planning. That was calculated.
And you have people on board to intercept a meeting. And also, where was this child, right? Because they were coaxing her to this meeting place. And originally she's supposed to be there to see her child. So it was definitely premeditated because the child wasn't there. Right? Initially, investigators didn't release a lot of information on the case, but they did state that they checked the car out in the surrounding area and noted that foul play was suspected. They found evidence of red bodily fluid on the road near the car as well as inside the vehicle. Veronica's glasses were also found at the scene, along with the remains of a broken hammer. A knife and clothing with evidence on it were also found, according to court documents from May 15th. Because this case took place in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma State Police Department, as well as the Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation, took over the case from Kansas authorities. They too wanted to keep the details of the investigation quiet and asked the family to avoid doing interviews and give authorities the space they needed to thoroughly investigate. Family members were left worrying and wondering in a sort of stasis until April 14th, one day after 4 suspects were arrested, which we will get into in just a moment. On that day, the remains of Veronica Butler and Jilian Kelly were uncovered, encased in a chest freezer, and buried 10 feet underground in a cow pasture just beyond the Oklahoma border in Texas County. As of now, the cause of their passing and medical examiner's report have not been released in this case. On April 13th, 4 suspects were arrested in connection with the case, one of which was Tiffany Adams, the children's grandmother. The other 3 were Tiffany's boyfriend, Tad Cullum, age 43, and their friends, married couple Cora, age 44, and Cole, age 58, Twombly. All four suspects were charged with first-degree homicide, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit homicide. None were granted bond after being taken in, and at the time, they all pled not guilty. It was later uncovered that the four suspects were members of a religious group known as God's Misfits. They're an anti government organization somewhat similar to the Sovereign Citizen movement. Though the suspects attended meetings with the group regularly, the leader, Squirrel, who lived in North Carolina, denounced them and expressed that he didn't follow their ideals and had no relationship with any of the suspects. Evidence was later released that claimed Tiffany contacted the court-appointed supervisor who usually attends visitations with Veronica. She told the unnamed individual to take some time off and let Veronica find someone else to work with. So Jilian wasn't even supposed to be there on March 30th. She was doing a kind of favor for Veronica so she could see her children. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time and had nothing to do with the situation she was pulled into.
You have the grandmother,
Right.
who has custody of Veronica's children. You have her boyfriend, which love knows no bounds.
Right.
But then you have two friends
Right.
that are in on this very calculated strategic plan.
Right.
And I almost wonder, like, when I start thinking about this God's Misfit group, like, were they trying to prove something to the group? Maybe the group didn't ask them to, but were they trying to prove something?
On April 24th, a fifth suspect was arrested in connection with Veronica and Jillian's fates. Paul Grace, age 31, faced the same charges as the other four suspects. He was allegedly part of the planning of the crime, carrying out the acts and burying the remains of these poor women in the cow pasture owned by a man who was unrelated to the case. It's worth noting, too, that after this took place, Tad Cullum allegedly covered the burial site with hay, so that cow traffic would likely make the scene a little less noticeably disturbed. A witness later came forward and told authorities that Paul Grace asked them how long DNA evidence lasted on clothes buried 15 feet in the ground. During his conversation with this individual, Paul also asked about how to get a man and his family into Mexico. Family members practically exploded during the arraignment hearing on April 17th as the suspects were brought in. They were addressing the suspects openly, calling them out. Veronica's father needed to be held back from rushing the suspects because he was overcome with grief and rage. These two families had practically no answers as they sat in that courtroom, looking at the faces of the people who took their loved ones from them. They didn't know what had happened, why, how. But what they did know was that Veronica and Jilian were no longer alive, and these were the people who were responsible for whatever happened to them. But why did this happen in the first place? According to authorities, Tiffany was aware that Veronica was trying to get more time with her children, but she wanted them in her custody alone. Not her sons, not Veronica's, hers. And she was willing to do some horrific things to make sure that happened. Tiffany had also made statements in the past that Veronica's brother had an incident take place with one of the children, though that has not been verified. During the legal proceedings that have taken place so far, Cora Twombly's teenage daughter provided authorities with crucial information about the crime that took place. Cora apparently admitted to her daughter that she and others participated in the crimes against the two women. She also said that there was another attempt on Veronica's life before this, but it didn't occur because Veronica didn't leave her home on the day that they first planned on harming her. The group had planned on dropping an anvil through Veronica's windshield because apparently equipment like that falls out of trucks all the time, and they didn't think it would be suspicious. Tiffany eventually admitted responsibility for what took place and provided a recorded statement attesting to it. So at least one confession has been collected. This case is still ongoing, but what we know is that Tiffany and Tad, a couple who had already had a violent history, worked with the Twombly's to commit this truly cowardly act against two innocent women, one who just wanted more time with her children, and the other who was just doing what she could to be helpful. Tiffany was willing to take the road of no return to ensure that the children remained with her, and as a result, those children have lost more than one family member. Tiffany, Tad, and the Twomblys have not been found guilty yet. Because this case is still in progress, the trial itself may take place anywhere between the spring and fall of 2025, so we have a while to wait. Keep in mind, though, that Oklahoma still has capital punishment as a possibility. If found guilty, this option may be what the courts decide on. Only time will tell. Tiffany really wanted the children for herself. She didn't want them with her son or even with Veronica. So I would have to point out that this is that possession mentality where, she's feeling as if she owns the children, right? She's trying to exert control and dominance over the situation and further alienate the mother away from her children. And potentially the father too, which we don't know, right? And with that being said, she would then have leverage for whatever it was that she wanted to do with the children. But either way, it did not support the children's emotional stability, because this kind of dynamic is very toxic, and the children feel as if they're being pulled left and right. And I'm pretty sure Veronica, this intensified her urgency to get her things together to be able to support her children.
Yeah, I definitely think as we go through the case that mental health is a big factor. You have that possession mentality. You have a religious cult. You have pre-planning of a murder that we find out about later that didn't go through, where they thought anvils falling off of cars was a normal everyday occurrence. You have the calculated approach to planning this out, and then the running of their mouths. They're telling a 16-year-old, asking questions of random people. I definitely think mental health plays a role here in the outcome. And, my concern is, one, that those red flags weren't seen by the courts and this woman had custody.
It goes back to the court-appointed supervisor, right? They weren't actually a professional, so they were not equipped to point out certain red flags.
Right. The woman that was told to take a few days off is actually Tiffany's friend. So I'm sure that looked something kind of like, hey girl, take a couple days off. I really want to screw Veronica over.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think about what during the script it talks about the Tiffany being alerted to Veronica filing for additional custody. And did her knowledge make her feel like I need to act? How would it be different if there was no knowledge? Maybe, they go to court and it's surprise sprung upon her that she's losing custody. And obviously, we could go in a million different directions on how this all transpired and everything else, but I just wonder from like a process perspective with custody cases overarchingly, what they see.
Exactly. And I know offline we were really talking about the family's outbursts in the courtroom and how that could potentially taint the jury, their opinion.
Yeah, I wonder, does that open it up? I've always wondered with open courtrooms, and if the victim's family is screaming, they're crying, one, does that impact the jury, which as a human and an empathetic human, that would impact me. But then does that open the door down the road for an appeal where they can say, hey, this person's outburst in court was what caused the jury to say they were guilty.
Right, exactly. So that's really interesting, the way that that's unfolded and how it was documented.
So this case is still ongoing. As we mentioned, it is set to go to trial in early next year. So we'd really like for you to follow along with us. We'll do some updates once they come out.
As mentioned, the case of Veronica Butler and Jilian Kelly is still ongoing, but as evidence continues to roll out, we're confident that more answers will come to light. Though no amount of information could ever excuse the horrific acts that these women endured, we hope that uncovering the truth and holding responsible parties accountable will at least provide the families broken by this senseless crime some shred of comfort. Thanks for stopping by to learn about the case of Veronica Butler and Jilian Kelly. Though the circumstances are extremely grim, I'm grateful that you took the time to be here and learn a little bit about what happened to these women. If you learned something or enjoyed this episode, make sure to like and subscribe and turn on post notifications to get a heads up when a new episode is up. Feel free to discuss the details of the case in the comment section, but as always, keep it respectful. My name is Lachey, and I'm with my co-host Marie. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time on Unmasking True Crime Misdeeds.